Thanks, everybody. I would have expected some kind of a necklace or something to wear. I don't know how you're supposed to wear this. Thank you, everybody. I'm humbled, I'm honored, and I am so grateful because indeed this is, in my estimation, the most important room in America. And each of you who comprise this room, the most important soldiers of democracy, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being so. I started my day with American Promise. I put some of your honey in my smoothie, and you fed me steak at night, so you just totally ruined my whole American Promise diet, but I thank you for that. I want to thank Julia and Matt. You know, moments like that are the ones that wow Americans and that we simply never get to see. And hallelujah, amen, exactly. And I want to salute the two of you. And you know, since the topic of Maine and Mike Johnson came up, I thought I'd just tell a couple of quick stories. And Senator Bennett, of course, from Maine as well. Some of you might know, probably only a couple, that I ran for president briefly this past year. And I'm in New Hampshire campaigning pretty hard, and we're in North Conway, which is on the border of Maine. Now, as a little boy, I went to camp in Fryeburg, Maine, right across the border of North Conway, and a great experience. The owner of the camp, a man named Dick Krasker, second-generation owner, a very tough, kind of almost military-like manager of this camp, both when I was a camper and a counselor, somebody who I was quite intimidated by. And lo and behold, I digress. I asked my team if there's anything we could do in Fryeburg, since we're so close. And they said, well, marijuana has just become legal in Maine, and there's a dispensary right across the border. You might want to check that out. So my team and I, with the press, you know, in tow, walk into this dispensary for a tour, and I kid you not, who is the first person I see? 85-year-old Dick Krasker, my camp director, buying some weed. So I love Maine. and Mike Johnson, you probably know this. It wasn't that long ago when Mike Johnson was about as recognizable as I am as a member of Congress. And about, I don't know, probably 3-4 years ago, maybe it was my first or second term, he and somebody else invite me to attend the Thursday prayer breakfast, which is mostly, as you can imagine, Republican evangelicals. It was a little bit intimidating and odd because I'm a Democrat. But what really kind of freaked me out is I'm Jewish. But I got to tell you, and this is one of those great stories you'll never see on Fox News or MSNBC, went to the prayer breakfast, and it was one of the most wonderful, hospitable, beautiful mornings of my entire tenure in Congress. Guitar playing, fraternity, joy, life story sharing, some prayer, and so much decency. I think the guest the week after was Rashida Tlaib, if you can imagine that. I say that just because, you know, I've seen Mike Johnson in action. So many of the names that unfortunately become tainted because of our media are actually people of decency, and we might disagree regularly, but I do want you to know, and that's why I want to start my remarks with this, that all is not lost, and hope is a theme tonight. It will be my mission as I continue my journey wherever that leads. And I will talk a little about the media, because I do think that is the root of our problems, but I want you to know all is not lost. And I want to thank you all for committing your time and your treasure and your tenacity to ending legalized corruption. And I say that again, legalized corruption that increasingly defines, and I would argue increasingly diminishes, American democracy. And as I complete my third and now final term in the United States Congress, I'm humbled to be recognized with this wonderful honor, and just to see it again if you want to take a look. And I'm more inspired than ever, I mean this sincerely, more inspired than ever to remind people that no matter what your top political issue might be, I ask that you make campaign finance reform your number 2. My journey to this city and to this stage was anything but linear. I know Jeff shared a little about my bio. I was born on Richard Nixon's inauguration day, which I do not remember, in 1969. My father, Captain Artie Peffer, was raised in St. Paul, Minnesota. My grandfather, his dad, died when my dad was only 10. My grandma Ruth had to go work at a department store selling boys' suits to try to make ends meet for my dad and my Uncle Howard. My dad couldn't afford college. He wanted to be an attorney, so he earned an ROTC scholarship to attend the University of Minnesota, graduated cum laude, and then was sent to Vietnam. I was born January 20th, 1969, and he was killed in action on July 26th, just 6 months later in 1969, just a couple days after the moon landing. And I was 6 months old, my mom was 24 and widowed, and we had nowhere to go. So we lived with my great-grandparents in St. Paul for the first 3 years of my life. And then I got lucky. I got really, really lucky. My mom met and remarried a wonderful man, Eddie Phillips. He adopted me, brought me into a great family, a family of success and philanthropy, of high standards, lots of love, and a whole lot of advice. Some of you might know my adopted grandma was Dear Abby and my aunt Ann Landers. So if any of you, I said to Jeff, if you give me this award, I will share advice for any of the lovelorn in this room if you might need. I graduated from Brown University, went back to Minnesota to get my MBA, and then I embarked on a 30-year career in business. Bicycle apparel at first, then of course spirits, Belvedere vodka, our biggest brand, then ice cream, Talenti gelato. By the way, if I could serve ice cream with Ben Cohn, I could work with any Republican. From Belvedere, we went to build Talenti gelato, and then I started a small chain of coffee shops. So if nothing else, you cannot tell me I don't know what Americans like and need: vodka, ice cream, and coffee. And as a fifth-generation American, whose foremothers and forefathers fled late 19th century Russian pogroms, and perhaps, and I say this I think with some authority, I'm probably the most fortunate Gold Star child in the United States of America. So nothing has inspired me more than gratitude and thankfulness for my good fortune. But if you told me on November 7th, 2016, that I would be in front of you in this capacity as a member of Congress, I would have said you were out of your minds. I was living a great life in Minnesota. I was enjoying raising my 2 teenage daughters. Well, enjoying is relative, but they're extraordinary now. I was having success in business. I was investing in my community, and I was anticipating a retirement of leisure, not of legislation. My interest in campaign finance at that time was really limited to figuring out some way, anyway, to remove my damn name from the donor list circulating amongst every single Democratic candidate for every office in the United States of America. But I think it's fair to say, and by the way, no matter your politics, and I mean this very sincerely, no matter your politics, I love you all. If you are a person of principle and conviction, I love you, period. But I will say that night of the election, which happened to be my eldest daughter Daniela's first time voting, and my daughter Pia was 16 at the time, I'll confess I was really surprised that evening and disappointed. But I remember telling my family that evening that, we've got to give this new president a chance. That is our job. It's a responsibility as Americans to support our newly elected president. So I went to sleep, encouraging my family to do so, but I woke up the next morning to the sound of my 16-year-old daughter, Pia, crying in her bedroom. She had just overcome Hodgkin's lymphoma. She's a gay woman. I did not know that when she was 16. But when I sat at the foot of her bed that morning, I have to tell you all of you, especially who are parents, I saw a fear in her eyes, this young woman of privilege. It left an instant and indelible mark on me, her father. And I sat at the breakfast table that morning, FaceTimed my elder daughter at college, and I promised them that I would do something. I reached that moment in my life where I recognized it was time to stand up and not take it for granted any longer. So I asked all my friends, should I run for Congress? And to a T, everyone said, absolutely not. So I did it anyway. And I determined that the only way I could possibly defeat a 4-term incumbent Republican, a member of House leadership, I think the second largest recipient of PAC money in the entire Congress, who had won by 14 points that night in 2016, in a district, mind you, that had not elected a Democrat since 1958, I figured, you know what? I'm going to have to do this a little bit differently. And doing it differently meant making it fun. So I bought a 1960 International Harvester Metro van. We named her the government repair truck. Some Some would note regularly that if that was the objective, it should be probably a lot larger. We coined the slogan, "Everyone's invited." Everyone's invited. And I drove that truck all around my district, probably thousands of miles in 2017, 2018. I opened some coffee and lemonade. I put out a couple lawn chairs, and I'd drive into neighborhoods, and I'd simply sit and entertain a conversation with anybody who would have one. And it was beautiful, and I had fun. And I started to quickly recognize on the other side of the table this absolutely grotesque industry of campaign finance. Now, I thought it was really lame to be solicited nonstop. Let me tell you, it is a whole lot worse having to make those calls. So I decided I would do this differently. I decided I would be the only member of Congress and candidate at that time who would not take any PAC money of any kind, no special interest money, no lobbyist money of any kind, that I would not receive money from members of Congress. If I was elected, I would not give it, and I would refuse to create a leadership PAC. And that makes me the only one out of 535 Americans in our Congress to do that. And thank you. Now, some say, as a person of privilege, and I did put a little bit into my first campaign, that that's easy for him, that's not fair to the rest of us. But I raised $5 million that year, $5 million by working my tail off from small dollar donors and individuals. And I can tell you, it's possible. It's absolutely possible. And I had a joyful time on the campaign trail. Won the first election in 2018 by 12 points, and in the last one, won almost by 20. So we did so not because of politics, because of decency, and because of listening, and because of invitation instead of confrontation. It is not that difficult. And when I arrived in Washington in early 2019, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I was expecting that first week here in Washington that Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy would do what you do when you bring together an entirely new cohort of American representatives: break bread, tell our life stories, do a ropes course, and build a little bit of trust. And let me tell you that none of that happened. It was the opposite. Systematic separation was the name of the game, began on day one. Separate buses going to separate events, very little orientation and even less team building, which I soon discovered was really by design. Why? Because the best way to prevent reform-minded individuals in Congress from being successful is to limit relationship building, withhold information, and consume as much time as humanly possible by forcing us to dial for dollars. And when I say that my colleagues spend almost every waking moment, not when they should be in hearings, when they should be meeting with constituents, when they should be breaking bread with fellow members of Congress, they're running across the street to make phone calls, go to breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, getting their PAC checks, and it is repulsive. And in a town in which my colleagues now spend 10,000 hours per week, think about this number, roughly 10,000 hours per week collectively raising money. Now, the money matters, but let me tell you just from some experience, a $5,000 check typically is not what sways somebody's opinion. But that $5,000 check buys something a whole lot more valuable, and that's time. And I can tell you from experience, Democrats and Republicans, they will tell you, no, it's not the money that matters, but let me tell you, the time does, because every single time someone's handing you one of those $5,000 checks, you're having a glass of wine with them, you're breaking bread, you're spending the evening at a cocktail party, you have their ear. And let me tell you, I don't have a single colleague that has gone to a fundraiser, a $5 fundraiser, that has spent 1 minute with people who matter just as much. And I just want to make that really clear. It's not just the money, it is the time. And I literally have found it really hard to have dinner on a Wednesday evening in Washington with a colleague because they're all busy. What are they doing? Going to 2 or 3 PAC events, getting their white envelope, having a warm glass of white wine, going to the next event, getting the same thing. I cannot find someone to have dinner with. And I mean it sincerely. And I would argue that I don't go to these events, but I would imagine I see these highly paid lobbyists trying to convince my colleagues that they need to pass legislation to ensure that any beverage called milk cannot come from anything but a cow. So I endeavored to do this differently once again. My wife and I started by hosting bipartisan dinners at our home in Washington. We got to know our friends. Many of my, well, it sounds so cliche, many of my best friends are Republicans. Well, that's, you know why? Because those are the people we invited over, and they, to this very day, remain some of my dearest friends. I joined the Problem Solvers Caucus. Now, how many of you know about us? Oh, good. Now, okay. This group, now in most rooms, when I ask that question, maybe one person raises their hand and then they see nobody else knows, so then they take their hand down. I wish more people knew, because if they did, they would know that there are 32 Democrats and 32 Republicans that are sick of the nonsense, that many of whom take political risk by sitting at the same table. We break bread once a week, we work together, we build trust, we build respect, and we are the ones behind the scenes, the workhorses, not the show horses. You don't know our names, but let me assure you, you're probably aware of our work. I also became a member of the Modernization Committee, for we are an 18th century institution trying to solve 21st century problems. That first week in Washington, not only did we not do a ropes course, I was handed a pager. Yes, I was handed a pager, which I never used, which is another metaphor for government. But I immediately became a champion for the internal and external reforms that I believe are necessary to improve outcomes and return power to the people to which it belongs, which is what aligns all of us. And that's why I decided quickly to co-lead the Democracy for All Amendment. The Citizens United decision, I believe, I'm sure like all of you, was one of the most despicable decisions in Supreme Court history, unleashed a sickening wave of dark money in politics, and I believe disproportionately is responsible for the erosion of decency and the growing toxicity of American politics. Co-sponsoring the Democracy for All Amendment was one of the first actions I took after being sworn in 6 years ago, and I'm proud to co-lead that again in the 118th Congress right now. Now, amending the U.S. Constitution is no easy task, and it is a serious and consequential matter that I surely do not take lightly. But our founders, in my estimation, intended it to be a living and breathing document that can and should be updated on occasion to address the issues and challenges that never could have been conceived in the 18th century, including huge sums of money in politics amongst them. American Promise has done extraordinary work on this issue, which is why I love you all, I love this organization, I cannot wait to remain involved in the future. And that's why the For Our Freedom Amendment is part and parcel to this initiative, another great step forward to ensure that our elections are decided by the American people, not by politicians, not by corporations, and surely not by foreign and special interests. If any of you haven't read George Washington's farewell address recently from 1796, I encourage you to do so. He was able to recognize, I would argue, the three most challenging issues this country faces back in 1796. Foreign influence, geographic disparities, and of course, political parties. And I remind young people, including today a tour of the Capitol, that George Washington remains the only United States president in our history who is not affiliated with a political party. So that brings me to the theme of this evening, which is hope in an age of polarization. It is the single most common question that is asked of me as a member of Congress. People asking me, is there anything we can do? They're afraid. Is there anything I can do? And my answer is damn right there's something we can all do, every one of us. We can be respectful, we can be invitational, we can see differences as opportunities, not challenges, and we can always find common ground, if and only if we are willing to seek it. And that's why I am proud to be recognized as one of the most bipartisan members of Congress. But let me tell you something. Many of my colleagues do not have the luxury of trying to be bipartisan because they are not rewarded for it when they go home. That's why I think we need some gerrymandering reform. I'm lucky to go to a district back in Minnesota, the most highly engaged district, highest voter turnout, highest census self-return rate in the country. They'd elected Republicans for 60 years, then they elected me. But when I go home, people want to know about the Problem Solvers Caucus. They want to know about respect and decency. They want to blend fiscal responsibility with social realism. And I'm rewarded for it. I really celebrate my colleagues on the Problem Solvers Caucus, like Dusty Johnson, who goes home to South Dakota and takes a lot of heat for sitting at the table with Democrats, who has to watch ads against him in his primaries with me in it. Because I brought him to the Minnesota State Fair, then he brought me to Sioux Falls. He got the better end of that deal, I should say. But I honor people like that who are taking legitimate political risks to do what is right for this country. It is a rare, rare breed in Congress. And by being bipartisan, I don't compromise my principles. It means I prioritize compromise. It's actually really simple. and I think a lesson for anybody who might be married in this room would understand. And I would argue, back to the media for a moment, I would argue that we cannot allow the angertainment industry, and I'll say it again, the angertainment industry, to have us believe that America is intractably divided, because we are not. We are not. I went to a Trump rally in New Hampshire when I was running for president. I had an event across the street. There were probably 50 people. Of course, I look across the street. There were about 5,000 people waiting in line. I didn't know what it was, so I told my team I'd like to go say hi to these folks. It turned out to be a Trump rally across the street. It was my first. But I got to tell you, some of you may have seen, because I went on some shows after that. It was one of the most, I would say, life-changing experiences I've had in Congress, because I was greeted. I spent 45 minutes walking the line, just talking to people. Every one of them hospitable, every one of them friendly, every one of them decent. Many of them never been to a Trump rally before, extraordinarily diverse, and all of them simply frustrated. And I found more connection with the people in line that night than I found a division. And I mean that sincerely. We are being told that some folks are deplorable, or we're socialists, or we're insurrectionists. My God, sickening. And they're making billions upon billions of dollars by distributing anger and generating fear amongst liberals and conservatives alike. And it's bothering me immensely. So I think we have to address these perverse incentives that are inspiring some of my colleagues to act like absolute imbeciles. I don't need to mention their names. You probably know them. But they're human beings. They operate on reward systems. The reward system right now says that if you want an expeditious path to national name recognition, if you want huge sums of campaign cash, you want political prominence, you want to be a VP candidate, act like an asshole. I was supposed to say imbecile, but I didn't have my glasses on, you see. In my 6 years in Congress, I've seen the House of Representatives from both sides of power, and it has taught me a lot about working across the aisle. I believe we're going to be facing years of slim majorities in the Congress, and that means working together isn't just a goal, it's going to be a requirement if we want to get things done. In fact, the first bill that I had signed into law was with my Freedom Caucus arch-conservative Republican colleague, Representative Chip Roy of Texas. Now, depending on the rank, I think last year I was the number one on the Common Ground scorecard. This year I think I'm 12. Chip might be 433 in the House. But Chip was one of those guys that I met as a freshman. You wouldn't think we would have a lot in common, but we became friends because we made it a point. And when we were in the heart of COVID, the worst part of COVID, Chip and I were both at home, he in Texas, me in Minnesota, on recess and visiting with small business owners, hearing the same thing about the Paycheck Protection Program. And while he and I don't agree much politically, we are buddies, and then we came back to Washington. And we were talking about what these small businesses were saying about the program, how it wasn't working for them. So we got together and we wrote a bill, the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act, that, if you might remember, allowed those resources to be used for more than just paying employees, rent and other needs, and it saved probably hundreds of thousands of jobs in many businesses. We wrote that together, and here's the beautiful thing. We had Trump in the White House, we had Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, and Chip knew that he couldn't get a bill on the House floor, and I knew that I wouldn't get a bill signed into law without a champion. We had to work with each other. And we brought our bill to the House floor. I had to actually use some leverage with Nancy Pelosi, which is a whole other story. But we got that on the floor. It passed 417 to 1. Mm-hmm. Thomas frickin' Massey, I'm telling you. $417 to 1. President Trump passed the Senate. President Trump signed it into law. And the coolest thing is Chip brought me one of the pens from the signing ceremony the next day, because I think my invitation to the signing ceremony must have gotten lost in the mail. But my point is, that's the story, and nobody would know it, Nobody would know that Chip Roy and Dean Phillips, President Trump, Nancy, that we actually got it done. And I love that moment. And back in Minnesota, I've been really focusing my efforts on getting people together. We started a series called the Common Ground Workshops in partnership with another great organization I'm sure some of you know, Braver Angels, I hope. Okay? Yeah, give them some love. If you don't know Braver Angels, they're simply Democrats and Republicans doing what Julie and Matt just did up here, trying to bring people together and find commonality, not just division. And all we do in Minnesota, it's really cool. We just bring 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans to a table. We break bread. We get to know each other a little bit, tell our life stories, and then we engage in a facilitated discussion about policy, usually healthcare and immigration. Now, it won't surprise many of you in this room, but it's shocking to most in attendance how much common ground there is, both about the problems and even the solutions when you sit face to face. And in a no small way, that experience, these experiences inspired me to make my run for president because it's really born from a belief, A, that competition is the vitamin of democracy, I hope you would agree, and that common ground and common cause, and maybe being younger than 80, maybe, may be good attributes for future American presidents. 78, sorry, good point. I stand corrected. And while I knew that such a pursuit, that is running for president against an incumbent, would likely mean the end of my tenure in public office and require me to step down from my House leadership post, I really did feel that America's exhausted majority deserved an alternative. People spilled blood in this country to ensure we never had a king or queen, that we didn't have coronations, that we had competitions. And no matter your politics, I believe we need to invest more in competition. And while I probably barely made a dent in the machine, it really was, running for president was the most joyful, magnificent experience of my life. And it restored my faith in Americans, in America, and completely obliterated my faith in America's political duopoly. And I mean that sincerely. I promised myself 6 years ago when I ran that I would never, ever place self-preservation over principle, ever, which is the name of the game in Washington. I see some of the most wonderful, extraordinarily good human beings consistently compromise their own principles in favor of self-preservation. So I voted my conscience all the time. I spoke the uncomfortable truths. I refused to play the discomforting games. And I am more inspired than ever to work with all of you to bring more of that ethos to the U.S. Congress, a place that surely needs more of it. So, thank you. So in closing, some of you might be wondering, if I really found this whole journey worthwhile. I was trapped in the House chamber on January 6th. I've had to work with some awfully difficult human beings. And it begs the question, did I make a difference and did I make any impact, whatsoever? And the answer is yes, but it's probably a little bit different than you might imagine. And I'll close with this. At the end of one of our recent Common Ground workshops back in Minnesota, at the end of these gatherings, they're about 2 to 3 hours, and at the very end, we just go around the table and each participant shares about 30 seconds about what they derived from this convening. And you can imagine, it's always a really interesting part of this convening. And in this recent experience, this young woman, Emily, looks across the table at Dave, across from her, and says, Dave, when you parked your F-150 with the Trump sticker next to me, I almost got back in my car and drove off. That I could not really even bear the notion of sitting at a table with you. And then she smiled and looked at Dave and said, I got to tell you, though, I've never sat with a Trump supporter, and I really like you. And I'm surprised about how much we agreed on today. And I was really heartwarmed. I thought that was going to be the special moment. But then that gets around the table a few minutes later to Dave, and Dave looks at Emily, and he says, Emily, when you got out of your Prius, I wanted to run it over. But Dave continued. He said, you know what, Emily, I'm really glad I didn't. I'm really glad I didn't, because I've never, ever had a conversation with a progressive before, and I cannot believe about how much we agree on. So I want to thank you, Emily. And at that moment, the burly Trump supporter and the bleeding heart liberal stood up and they embraced in front of our table. And I share that with you because that moment, this little tiny moment, made my entire service in Congress totally worthwhile. And it brings a smile to my face. It makes this award so meaningful. It makes my time with you a treasure, because we determined and we showed that just with a little bit of intention and a little conversation, anything is possible. So to all of you gathered tonight, thank you. Thanks for believing in these possibilities. Thanks for activating and energizing and mobilizing and putting your time and treasure at risk to do what we all know is so important. And I referred to you earlier as soldiers of democracy. And sometimes soldiers are war-making soldiers, and sometimes they're peacekeeping soldiers. And I think this is a group of the latter, and I'm grateful to all of you. I will be among you soon as a former member of Congress, a soldier with you. I look forward to spending more time together, to having some more laughs together, to bringing more people together, and most of all, keeping the faith together. So Godspeed, best of luck. Don't go. Well, considering some of the things I stand for, I think it would be awfully classless to try to stick around. And I'll tell you one other quick story. I'm sitting on the House floor 2 weeks ago, and for some reason, Nancy Pelosi just found out that I wasn't running again. And she has a photographic memory. So, in fact, when we just traveled to the 80th anniversary of D-Day together, by the way, no matter what you think of Nancy Pelosi, she is the most extraordinary wielder of power I've ever met in my entire life. I've never seen someone who can go from 7 a.m. to midnight, no matter what time zone in the world, nonstop. 18, 19-year-old interns cannot keep up with Nancy Pelosi. Anyway, she comes up to me on the House floor the other day, and she taps me on the shoulder and says, are you out of your mind? You're not running again? And this is like in late May, and I said, no, Speaker, I'm gonna go on and do some other things. And she said, you can still register to declare candidacy in Minnesota up until June 4th. Like she knows like that much. And I said, Madam Speaker, and I said, Madam Speaker, I'm serious. I'm not going to do it again. I think you're going to love who I think is going to replace me. And she would not let me go. She was incredulous that I would not stick around. But I believe deeply in making this not a lifelong service or a career. I think we need to inspire and energize and make space for more Americans to serve, because. And I'll close with this, and I'll tell you, because I don't know if I'll make a bigger difference outside of Congress than I made in. That's not the issue. But I can tell you from what I just learned and what I experienced as a representative of this extraordinary country, it'll make me a better citizen. And I just think we need more people who cycle in and out of there, and the best and brightest from all perspectives, principled conservatives, principled progressives, to serve some time and then move on and back into private life and make this country better. So we can talk about term limits next time. I love you all. Have a great evening. And thank you.